Just be yourself. You've heard it 1,000 times. From your parents, from self-help books, from Instagram therapists with aesthetically pleasing feed layouts, from that one friend who seems to have it all figured out. Just be yourself and everything will work out. Just be authentic. Just show up as your true self. So, you try. You really try. You post the real version of yourself on social media, the vulnerable caption about your struggles. But you rewrite it 4 times first. You A/B test the tone. You wonder, is this too vulnerable? Not vulnerable enough? Will this get engagement? You try to be authentic at work, but not too authentic. Can't let them see you're struggling. Can't admit you don't know something. Can't show weakness. So you perform. A curated authenticity. Just enough realness to seem human, not enough to seem incompetent. You try to find your authentic self through therapy, journaling, meditation retreats, personality tests, astrology, human design, Enneagram, Myers-Briggs, attachment theory. And somehow, the more you search for your true self, the less sure you are that it even exists. Because here's the thing nobody tells you. Every time you try to be yourself, you have to decide which self to be. The professional self, the friend self, the family self, the creative self, the responsible self, the fun self, the self that's working on themselves, the self that has their shit together, the self that's allowed to fall apart. Which one is the real one? And here's what really keeps you up at night. What if? What if there is no real one? What if the whole idea of an authentic self is just another thing you're failing at? What if being yourself is just another performance? Another metric you're being measured against? Another way you're not good enough? Because let's be honest, the pressure to be authentic is exhausting. You have to be vulnerable, but not too vulnerable. Real, but not too real. Honest, but still palatable. Yourself, but the right version of yourself. And suddenly, just be yourself, this thing that was supposed to be liberating becomes another cage, another impossible standard, another way to fail. You thought authenticity would set you free. But what if it's just another trap? What if the whole concept of being yourself is a lie? Not a lie you're telling, a lie you were sold. Welcome to the authenticity trap. And I'm about to tell you why being yourself is impossible. Let's start with a question. When did being yourself become work? Think about it. 50 years ago, nobody talked about authenticity as something you had to achieve. You just existed. You had a role, son, daughter, worker, parent, and you played that role. Sometimes you were happy, sometimes you weren't, but there was no anxiety about whether you were being your true self. But then something shifted. And to understand what happened, we need to talk about a philosopher who saw it coming from a mile away. Jean-Paul Sartre, French existentialist, chain smoker, professional pessimist, and the guy who gave us one of the most unsettling concepts in philosophy: bad faith, mauvaise foi. Bad faith for Sartre is a specific kind of self-deception. It's when you deny your own freedom by pretending you have no choice. When you say, "This is just who I am. I can't help it. It's my nature." But here's Sartre's radical claim. There is no fixed nature. There is no essential you underneath all the roles and performances. You are not a thing. You are a process, a constant becoming. You are free, terrifyingly, nauseatingly free, to choose who you are at every moment. And that freedom, That's what we can't stand. That's what we're desperate to escape. So we create stories. I'm an introvert. I'm not a math person. I'm just not good at relationships. We box ourselves into identities, into fixed selves, because the alternative, that we're radically free to be otherwise, is too much to bear. And that's bad faith. That's the lie we tell ourselves to escape our own freedom. But here's where it gets interesting. Because Sartre wrote this in the 1940s, before the self-help industry, before personal branding, before the entire economy was built on selling you yourself. Fast forward to now, to the age of authenticity. And suddenly the problem isn't that we're denying our freedom, it's that we're overwhelmed by it. Because now you're not just free to be yourself, you're required to be yourself. It's a moral imperative, a market demand. You have to find your authentic self, express your authentic self, monetize your authentic self. Personal brand, authentic leadership, showing up authentically, living your truth, being your best self, your most aligned self, your highest self. Authenticity stopped being something you are and became something you do. A performance, a product, a brand. The sociologist Charles Taylor, in his book The Ethics of Authenticity, traces this shift. He argues that authenticity used to mean something different. In the Romantic era, think Rousseau, Goethe, authenticity meant listening to your inner voice, your unique nature, your difference from society. It was a form of resistance against conformity. But somewhere along the way, authenticity got absorbed by the very forces it was supposed to resist. It became commercialized. Individualism became consumerism. Be yourself became express yourself through purchases. You can buy your authenticity now. It's a lifestyle brand. It's artisanal coffee and sustainable fashion and curated playlists in the right aesthetic and suddenly, being yourself requires a budget. Taylor calls this the malaise of modernity, the feeling that even our most intimate, personal choices are somehow scripted, borrowed, performed. Now, let's bring in another voice, the philosopher Theodor Adorno, Frankfurt School, critical theory, the guy who hated everything about modern culture. Adorno argued that capitalism doesn't just exploit your labor, it colonizes yourself. Your personality becomes a commodity. Your authenticity becomes marketable. You don't just have a job, you have a personal brand. You don't just have interests, you have a content niche. You don't just have relationships, you have a network. And the self, the authentic, unique, irreducible self, it becomes just another product to be packaged, marketed, and sold. Adorno called this the administered world, a world where even rebellion, even individuality, even authenticity itself gets absorbed and neutralized by the system. You think you're being authentic, but you're actually performing a pre-packaged version of authenticity that the market has already approved. The system doesn't need you to conform anymore. It just needs you to believe you're not conforming. And here's the philosopher who really nails it. Erving Goffman. Goffman was a sociologist who studied social interaction like a theater director. His big insight? All social life is performance. We're always on stage. We're always managing impressions. We're always playing a role. He called it the presentation of self in everyday life. You walk into a job interview, you perform competence. You go on a date, you perform charm. You post on social media, you perform authenticity. Even when you're trying to be real, you're performing realness. Even when you're being vulnerable, you're strategically vulnerable. You're managing how your vulnerability is perceived. And Goffman's point isn't that we're all fake. His point is that there is no backstage. There's no real you hiding behind the performance. The performance is the self. There is no authentic core waiting to be discovered. There's just a series of performances, of roles, of contexts, of versions of you. And the idea that there's a true self underneath all of that, that's the trap. Okay, so if there's no fixed, authentic self, if it's all performance, if being yourself is impossible, then what the hell are you supposed to do? Because this feels paralyzing, right? If you're not even real, if you're just a collection of performances and roles and contexts, then what's the point? Why try? Why care? Why not just give up? And I get it. This is the moment where existentialism can feel like nihilism, where philosophy stops being interesting and starts being depressing. But here's the thing. The fact that there's no fixed self isn't a tragedy. It's a liberation. Stay with me. Sartre, remember him? He said, existence precedes essence, which is a fancy way of saying you don't have a nature. You create your nature through your choices, your actions, your commitments. You're not a thing to be discovered. You're a project to be created. And yes, that's terrifying. Yes, that means you're responsible for who you become. Yes, that means there's no instruction manual, no essential self to find, no cosmic blueprint. But it also means you're free. Free from the tyranny of finding yourself. Free from the anxiety of, am I being authentic? Free from the exhausting performance of performing authenticity. Because if there's no authentic self to measure yourself against, then you can't fail at being yourself. You can just be. But here's where it gets more complicated. Because Sartre had this other concept, authenticity in the existential sense. Not authenticity as in being your true self, but authenticity as in owning your freedom, recognizing that you're making choices, refusing to hide behind excuses like, this is just who I am, or I had no choice. Existential authenticity means I choose this, not because it's my true nature, not because this is just who I am, but because I'm choosing it right now, in this moment. And that's a completely different thing than what the self-help industry sells as authenticity. The self-help version says, discover your true self and express it. The existential version says, there is no true self, so create one, through your choices, through your commitments, through how you live. One is about discovery, the other is about creation. One traps you in a search for something that doesn't exist. The other frees you to become something. Now, let's bring in another philosopher who helps us here. Michel Foucault. Foucault studied how power works in modern society, and one of his key insights is that power doesn't just repress you, it produces you. You think you're discovering your authentic self, but actually, you're being shaped by all these forces: culture, media, capitalism, psychology, self-help discourse, that tell you what an authentic self looks like. The authentic self is vulnerable but not weak, confident but not arrogant, successful but still real, ambitious but balanced, productive but also mindful. These aren't your values. They're the market's values, the algorithm's values, the therapy-speak industrial complex's values. So when you find yourself, what you're really doing is conforming to a pre-packaged version of selfhood that's been sold to you. And Foucault's solution? He called it technologies of the self. Instead of trying to discover who you are, you practice who you want to become. You work on yourself, not to reveal some hidden essence, but to craft yourself like an artist crafts a sculpture. You don't ask, who am I really? You ask, who do I want to become? What kind of person do I want to practice being? What values do I want to embody? It's not about authenticity, it's about artistry. And this brings us to someone really interesting, the philosopher Kwame Anthony Appiah. Appiah talks about how identity is never just individual. It's always relational. You're not just yourself. You're a son, a friend, a colleague, a citizen. Your identity is constructed through your relationships, your communities, your contexts. So the idea that you can be yourself in isolation, independent of all these relationships and contexts, is not just impossible, it's incoherent. You're not a fixed entity. You're a node in a network. You're different with your mom than you are with your boss, than you are with your best friend. And that's not inauthentic. That's not being fake. That's being human. Humans are contextual. We shift, we adapt. We perform different versions of ourselves in different contexts. And that's not a failure of authenticity. That's just what it means to exist in relationship with others. The trap is thinking there should be some core you that remains the same across all contexts, some essential self that you're betraying every time you adapt. But what if there's no betrayal? What if it's just multiplicity? What if you're allowed to be many things? What if the goal isn't to be yourself, but to inhabit yourself, all the versions of yourself, not as a lie, not as performance anxiety, but as fullness, as the recognition that you're bigger and more complex than any single identity could capture. Okay, so you're trapped in the authenticity trap. You've been told to be yourself, but you're not even sure who that is. You're exhausted from performing authenticity, from managing your personal brand, from curating your realness. So what now? Here's what you don't do. You don't go looking for your true self. You don't take another personality test. You don't journal about who you really are deep down, because that's just more of the trap. Instead, here's what you do. 1. Stop asking, who am I? Start asking, what do I care about? Identity is overrated. Values are underrated. You don't need to know who you are. You just need to know what matters to you, what you're willing to show up for, what you're willing to defend, what you're willing to sacrifice for. Do you care about honesty? Then practice honesty, not because it's your authentic self, but because you choose to value it. Do you care about creativity? Then create, not because you're a creative person, but because you're deciding to prioritize it. You don't discover your values, you enact them through your choices, through your time, through your attention. And those choices, they become you. Not because they reveal who you were all along, but because they create who you're becoming. 2. Embrace your contradictions. You don't have to be consistent. You don't have to be the same person in every context. You don't have to have a unified brand. You can be serious and silly, ambitious and lazy, confident and insecure, social and solitary. These aren't contradictions to be resolved. They're not signs that you haven't found yourself yet. They're signs that you're human. So stop trying to sand down your edges. Stop trying to fit yourself into a coherent narrative. Stop trying to be legible to others. Just be contradictory, messy, multiple, and let that be okay. 3. Reject the performance of authenticity. Stop posting the vulnerable content. Stop crafting the real captions. Stop performing your therapy breakthroughs for an audience. If you have something real to say it. But stop marketing your realness. Stop turning your inner life into content. Stop using vulnerability as a brand strategy. Because the moment you perform authenticity for an audience, it's not authentic anymore. It's strategic. And that's fine. Strategy is fine. Performance is fine. Just stop calling it authenticity. Call it what it is. Curation. Performance. Impression management. And then, create a space. A real space. A private space. Where you're not performing at all. Where no one's watching. Where there's no metric, no feedback, no validation. That's where you actually get to exist. Not as your authentic self, just as yourself, in the moment, without the story. 4. Practice becoming, not being. Stop thinking of yourself as a noun. Start thinking of yourself as a verb. You're not an introvert. You're someone who sometimes needs solitude and sometimes craves connection. You're not a writer. You're someone who sometimes writes. You're not an anxious person. You're someone who experiences anxiety. See the difference? One is fixed, the other is fluid. And fluidity gives you freedom, because if you're not a thing, you can't fail at being that thing. You're just in process. Always. Forever. And that's not a bug, that's the feature. 5. Give up on being understood. This is the hardest one, because we want so badly to be seen, to be known, to have someone look at us and say, "Yes, I get you. I see who you really are." But here's the truth. No one will ever fully understand you. Not because they're not trying, not because you're not explaining yourself well enough, but because understanding is impossible. You barely understand yourself. You're different every day. You contain multitudes. You surprise yourself constantly. So how could anyone else fully grasp you? And that's okay. That's beautiful even. You don't need to be understood. You just need to be accompanied. You need people who will walk beside you even when they don't fully get you, who will love you even when you're confusing, who will stay even when you're contradictory. And you need to do the same for them, because none of us are understandable. We're all just trying to exist together, in our multiplicity, in our mess. And finally, stop optimizing yourself. You're not a project to be improved. You're not a system to be optimized. You're not a brand to be refined. You're a person, imperfect, inconsistent, impossible to pin down. And the moment you stop trying to become your best self or unlock your potential or live authentically, the moment you stop all that, that's when you actually get to live. Not as your authentic self, not as your best self, not as any self at all, just as this, whatever this is, right now. The authenticity trap is everywhere. In every self-help book, in every Instagram caption, in every coaching session and personality test and find your purpose workshop. And the trap is simple. It tells you that there's a real you waiting to be discovered. And if you just search hard enough, optimize enough, invest enough, you'll finally find it. But you won't, because it doesn't exist. There is no essential self, no core you, no authentic version hiding under all the performances. There's just this. The choices you make, the values you enact, the relationships you show up for, the moments you inhabit. And here's the thing nobody tells you. That's enough. You don't need to find yourself. You don't need to be authentic. You don't need to have it all figured out. You just need to be here, making choices, caring about things, trying, failing, trying again. And some days you'll be one version of yourself, and other days you'll be another. And some days you won't recognize yourself at all. And that's not a crisis. That's not inauthenticity. That's being alive. So stop searching for your true self. Stop performing your authenticity. Stop trying to be the best version of anything. Just exist. In all your contradiction, in all your multiplicity, in all your glorious, confusing, impossible to pin down humanness. You're not a brand. You're not a narrative. You're not a fixed identity. You're a process, a becoming, a series of moments and choices and relationships and possibilities. And you don't need to understand it. You don't need to explain it. You don't need to perform it. You just need to inhabit it. The authenticity trap promised you freedom. Just be yourself and you'll be free. But the real freedom? It comes when you realize there's no self to be. There's just this. You. Here. Now. Choosing. And that's more than enough. You don't need to be authentic. You just need to be here.